everyone's schedules off. So firstly, I'd like to thank all the panelists that are here. Unfortunately, Anja van Staden had an emergency, so she's not going to be able to make it. But Justin, Inge, Jock, and Bernard, thank you for doing this. Give me one moment. I just want to introduce everyone in the room. So we've got Inge Malan. Inge has done a talk for us before on Figma and design systems. Thank you, Inge, for popping into the room again. Inge is currently a consultant design lead at MTN. Then we've got Jock Oberholzer. He is head of design and head of product design at Now Boarding Digital. He doesn't have any load shedding problems because he doesn't reside in South Africa anymore. We have Bernard Klute, who's a UX UI designer. He's from ISOFlow. Thank you for joining, Bernard. And then who did I miss? Mr. Slack, Justin Slack from New Media Labs, head of head of design and front-end development. Cool. So I'm going to open the floor, and maybe we start with you, Justin, just to do a quick intro for yourself, and then you can hand over to somebody else.
Sure. Thanks, Liesl. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Liesl said, my name is Justin. I work at a company called NML in Cape Town. We're a software development company. We work a lot in financial services, and we have a number of clients in that space, from very large investment companies to, small boutique kind of firms. And I head up the design and front-end department of sorts. And important to me are, all our UX and UI designers and our front-end developers. And I think relevant to today's topic is that we build design systems for all our clients that are tightly integrated with our code bases, and that we have a very strong developer-designer relationship where we work. Yeah, so that's it for me for now.
Who would like to go next? Anyone? Inge?
I'll go. I think you've pretty much nailed the introduction, but I'm Inge. I've been doing this for around 17 years, this being jumping around between all kinds of different fields of design. Many moons ago, I was even in fashion design for a few years. I've worked in retail, I've worked in software as a service, I've worked in golfing, I've worked in prop tech, and I've worked in edutech. I'm working for a large telco, like you mentioned. And yeah, so I do most things at the moment, I'm the design lead, so I'm managing a team and overseeing a few projects. But I do from time to time still work on small projects and do some UI work and work on design systems for smaller startups. And yeah, that's me. I think I'll be representing the consultants and the freelancers, seeing as the other freelancer has had an emergency. Sorry to hear about your emergency, Anja.
Thank you. Jock, can you go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jacques Oberholzer. I'm from Now Boarding Digital, and we're a very specialized UX, UI, everything product related on the design side studio in Cape Town, and quite a broad variety of clients that we service. FinTech as well, being a big sector we play in, but also online marketplaces. And I'm also a design consultant to a very large crypto firm in Europe. And so I've got the experience of being in a big team and then being in an agency team. And in both of them, we work very much with design process and design systems. So today's topic is very interesting for me. Looking forward to how we unpack it.
Thank you. Bernard.
Hi, yeah, as you mentioned, Lisa, I work for ISOFlow. we are a UX UI studio as well, also working on everything from smaller fintech projects all the way up to big insurers and banks and so on, trying to solve really kind of complex problems in-house and kind of figuring it out with our clients. My speciality is on the UI side and really the design system side. And I'm just kind of a general Figma design nerd, which makes the design system building the fun part.
Cool, thank you. I forgot to say in the beginning, if there are any questions that anybody have, you need to make a comment on YouTube, and we sort of have a back-end panel on this side where we'll see the questions coming through, so we can address them maybe a little bit later during the talk, or at the end of the talk, or maybe even during the talk. Cool. So shall we jump into a first topic? Very wide, I realize now, and general statement there. Yeah, I think so maybe one of the first things we can touch on is design systems and how all the collective parties make use of it and incorporate it into what they do on a daily basis. Maybe we can start there. Anyone can jump in.
Everyone's
I'm
waiting.
happy to start.
Go for
So,
it.
being the UI designer on most of our projects that have UX and UI, my focus usually starts with, depending on project size, not even a design system, just a good component library and good Figma component management, and then it scales up the more complex the project gets, to the point where we say, well, no longer is this a component library. We now actually go into design system where things need to be documented, managed, versioned, treated like it's its own product and has its own work streams and its own UI team. So that's kind of how we build those two very distinct things. And we say, when we do a design system, we treat it as something that is far wider than just good components, getting the dev team side by side with us to make sure that whatever we design in whatever format we design mirrors exactly what they have in code within design and within the documentation side.
I think I can maybe sort of add on to what you're saying. There is there's a big decision to be made in any project, whether it's for a client or for a big team, and that is, at what point do you move away from your little component library or substantial component library into a design system, or in what often happens in the software that we love, like Sketch and Figma, is that it ends up becoming a separate file that needs to be managed and versioned, and as you said. And the big concern that I had always building up on projects, they always start at a nice size and then they get very big and a lot of components, and as you said, it needs to become a design system. But you have a big drop down in speed then, because you're now sort of saving something elsewhere. And Figma is amazing because it's in the cloud, but it's still about publishing and then bringing those changes into the live document that you're working on. And what was interesting about the Figma conference that recently took place on design systems was that the data that they've tracked on people breaking components apart was unreal. That seems to be what people are doing. And so what we've tried to do at Now Boarding is, also try to stay very agile, as in, asking yourself the question of, is there a component that I can use from my design system or from my component library? But also, is there a better way to do this? And so it becomes a very fine balance between what is system and what is innovation for me, because we also need to continually be pushing the envelope in terms of UX and UI. So I like what you've sort of said there is like, it's a big call, it's a big thing, it needs versioning, it needs that. And it also needs to be treated as exactly that. It's going to be big. And don't underestimate that will suck up a lot of time, and that you should be giving yourself some freedom to be creative still.
I don't know if everyone's faces is arranged the same on their screens as it is on mine, but I'm kind of following a little pattern, so I feel like I have to speak next. But so obviously, I say obviously, but it's not obviously. So the thing between working for large corporations and working for smaller startups and different projects, etc., especially when it comes to design systems, is how different people approach the problem that is a design system. And yes, you're right. Many times it starts with a massive component library and you know, innovation and playing, and it then starts going a little bit slower. But I believe the feeling is slower. I think the result is faster as soon as you start working with your developers and you're actually building your design system. Your components become a reality, and it's not only an idea anymore. They are actually worth something. That massive component library of yours is not worth much. You can build designs real quick with your component library, but the development still takes long. So even though that process feels slower, as soon as it becomes a real design system, it's actually, I think in the long run, the solution that you're looking for, the thing that makes your life simpler and easier. What I can say about general processes is massive companies with all of their project management methodologies, etc., approach processes way different to the startups that you work on. The startups kind of feel like you are making headway way quicker because you fail faster. Whereas with the massive guys, it really feels like everything is just it feels well documented, but it feels so slow. Because you talk about design way more than you'd actually do design.
Yeah, process is a balance, I think. Like there's a point where I think a small company can run very well without it. And then there's this threshold where it can just all go pear-shaped very quickly without it. But I feel like it's a balancing act. Like how much of it do you have? Like is it to that extent that you do feel like you've got chains around your ankles? Is it just enough to make things run smoothly, you know? Yeah. Do you have anything to add design system-wise, Justin?
Yeah, I think points that have been raised that kind of resonate with me is I absolutely agree that there's that tension between a systematic approach that's that can be quite rigid, and then looking at innovative ways of solving problems. If you rely too heavily on your design system or your component library or whatever you call it, as driving everything that you do within the products that you're designing, you often are missing out on innovating on your solutions. So I think there's quite a strong tension there between a systematic approach to design in a process-driven way, and then I guess a more traditional conception of design as finding these innovative solutions to problems. So we definitely need to manage that tension in a way. And again, it comes down to the question I think raised by both Bernard and Jacques and Inge, is that what belongs in your design system and what doesn't, and when do you break out of your design system? Because sometimes you need to go, well, this is how we solve this here, but this is completely inappropriate in this particular situation. So you don't want to be hidebound by, as important as processes and rules, etc. are. You also want to say, okay, well, we're not entirely hidebound by these either. We can break out of this if we need to. Yeah. But that brings its own problems, because your designs in Figma are just in Figma. You need to have. They don't live there. They live in the browser. They live in the code. So you can manage breaking out of the design system if you have a very, very strong process for getting the design system into the code base, so to speak. So, I mean, this is something I always stress all the time. You know, your design system team, if you have one, needs developers, not just you know, UI and UX designers. You need developers who are as invested in that system as you are, to make those kinds of things possible. From the basic, here's our set of inputs, to here's our like crazy idea for this flow. You know? Yeah.
That's
We've got some
probably,
questions.
yeah, sorry.
No, you go. Sorry, Jock.
Yeah, I think I also wanted to reiterate what Inge brought up there, and you've just done that, but it's just really the day you commit into code, the game does change. And so being very aware of where your project is really probably, and we all do it naturally in our design file, where we give ourselves that freedom, and then when it goes into code and it needs to be iterated and versioned, then so that's a very defining moment, and probably something to bank as a designer building a design system, is just always know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something that we found when committing to, now it is a big design system, is when we start finding times where we need smart defaults. So, you know, this is a form field, this is a list of form fields. Rather spend my time on conceptualizing a single page and really putting effort into that, and giving some of our developers smart things to use even without us. So even from actual wireframes or whatever, and say, here's your form process. I'll figure out the really user intensive bit, but then you can build out whatever you need to, because we've figured out, you know, 3 form fields and a button is login, and we can move on, you know.
Yeah. I think sometimes we get bogged down in the details, right? With things that maybe we've already solved 100,000 times, to be hyperbolic. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just to that as well, and also to the whole question of code and when that happens, I think one of the things that fundamentally changed the way we worked was when we adopted Storybook as a front-end framework to build our front ends, because it lends itself so perfectly to like an atomic design principle. And you know, you build up from those in exactly the same way that you work in Figma. You know, you build out your little components in your library with the variations, and then you put them into a component itself, and then into maybe a page or whatever. So we have a really good one-to-one relationship between Figma and a tool like Storybook for managing the code. Of course, Storybook is just one example of a tool that does that. We adopted it because it fits into our preferred frameworks. So I think having a code system that matches what you're doing in Figma, I just assume we all use Figma. Perhaps a dangerous assumption. But yeah, and then something that becomes really important on that as well is how you're naming things. So and documenting. If you're naming and documenting in Figma in a way that makes sense for your front end, then you're solving a whole lot of battles as well. Yeah. So all those things are
one of the
really
biggest design system lessons that I've ever learned is working with the developers on tokens and how they ingest, you know, design system tokens. Is you're so focused always as the designer on how something feels or looks or interacts, but there's that layer of structural mind mapping where things have to kind of make sense together. And that was a big learning curve for me from a UI designer, going, you know, I can't just call it button 1, button 2. It has to have real meaning and pull in what that meaning is across the tool, and really defining what those headers do, what the buttons do, and why they do certain things, while not trying to stay too restrictive, but trying to, you know, again, define those things that you don't have to worry about ever again. all those hover states are done once and we don't have to worry about them again.
I want to kind of jump in and play catch up because there's something I wanted to say about what everyone said. I'll start from the front and work backwards. Yes, everyone does use Figma, I assume, but some of us sometimes have to go back in time and use Sketch, and I'm sorry for Sketch. They will find me and burn me. One day I might want to work there and they'll be like, remember that panel. So that's the first thing. My personal preference is Figma. I can't imagine life without variants in the collaboration, although they seem to be moving that way too. But anyway, long story short, let's. The thing that I wanted to mention about 2 conversations back was the fact that design systems were very organic. And I mean, I don't know if it's Bernard or Bernard, but he mentioned that
a bit of both.
The Bernard, let me not butcher it. I'll call you Mr. B, but he mentioned that, how we should treat design systems as a product and how the focus from everyone, including the developers and everyone, should be very much on this as a product. I also wanted to add to that and just mention that it is organic. It never dies, it never ends, it never stops. You can't stop innovating because you have developed a component and decided that, this now solves one problem. And I think I'm touching on what some of the other people have mentioned as well. It is ever changing. It grows, and it is not something that you can ever. You can't copy paste. So you can take inspiration from other people, but it's not something that you can necessarily duplicate, because some people would like complex components and some people would just like the basic things so that the general feel of whatever is happening stays the same, and they still have the room to innovate and to play and create certain components for certain scenarios. So I think the processes or the procedures would be different for each of these use cases or stories. So yeah, that's me playing catch up on what everyone said.
You're touching on a very interesting subject as well around, I think software allows us to apply sort of best practice methodologies, naming conventions, whatever they are, but we are all still individuals and still humans and do things our own way. And you think about a design system as it's a product, and it's an expensive product, hundreds, thousands of hours that went into building it. But you can't, as you said, you can't take it and duplicate it and reuse it for the next. But the question really could be is, well, how much could you? Is there a base? And you can go onto Figma and you can download. I mean, people are offering free design systems, free libraries, free everything. And it's very hard to start there because you're starting in someone else's IP far down the line. So what's also interesting about design systems is they have our personal touch, they have our IP, they have our best practice, our way of doing things, or our team. It could be a combination. And at Now Boarding, we try and get the team to use similar naming conventions, similar ways of forward/slashing your groupings in Figma and things like that, so that as you collaborate more and more on files that Figma allowed us to do, that you know where you are in the file. And I think for me, it's important to know that these design systems have a very personal touch as well. And as a lead of a team, it's your job to make sure that it carries is understandable by your entire team, but is still working its magic for the product and the brand that you are servicing.
I see there's actually a question from Skulk that is quite related to what you've just been saying, Jacques. I'm just going to pop it up if we don't mind. Yeah.
Mm.
Curious how the panel feels about building your system on top of existing off-the-shelf systems like Material Design versus creating from scratch. Exactly something that you were just touching on.
Yeah, Material Design is a great one. We've had clients come to us and say, can you just use Material Design because Google built it and it's supposed to be tested. And and this goes back many years ago to the reason why I didn't want to do that, at least at Now Boarding, was there was a time when every Android app looked the same. And so before you build a design system, you need to build a design. It needs to be brand-centric. It needs to be unique. It needs to be engaging. It needs to answer the specific goals of, and so you can't start a project with a design system. But material design and Apple's human, I think they call it human design, and they are fantastic resources to look at best practice. So I constantly go to them for my research. If I haven't worked out the best way to do a switch or a checkbox and I want to see what Google are doing, always go back and look to it. But I would never use it as a starting point, because it puts you in a box and you will end up having, if you work in telco or in a bank and they're both using material design, Standard Bank will look the same as Nedbank. And what's the good in that? You're not creating a unique experience then. So as you can tell, that I feel big on that subject.
So I think it also depends on what you're building. 100% agree that there's much to learn, best practices. I mean, they've done so many user tests, and a lot of times those big, large design systems are already accessibility tested, and they're pixel perfect, and everything inside of there works really well. So there's a lot to learn, but it depends on what you designed for. So it depends on the product. If you are working on systems using functional design to get a product where the product is the focus, it doesn't hurt. But if I'm building a brand and I am passionate about the whole experience, you're going to have to start somewhere else. You're going to have to start with a story. Unfortunately, no matter what you look at will represent that story. You have to start from the story and work on your brand first, speak to the people, get everyone involved, and start building your design system from the beginning, because then it includes every essence of your company or your brand.
I also lean quite heavily on material when it's, and I at the risk of sounding ridiculous, when it's more, in my mind, admin components, things where I feel I can't add anything to this in this specific space that material hasn't already figured out. So things like inline banners and snack bar notifications and things like that. They've solved some key things across multiple viewports that I probably can't solve better. But using that then as the baseline and saying, they've solved it. They have the spacing rules, but then as the design team, how do we add a little bit of delight there? How do we add an animation that material might not do? How do we add a hide reveal that they might not do, or an illustration? And then using the rules of when to use what, right? When to use a snack bar over a inline notification, over a dialogue. They've solved those things where I think lean on it and then make my job making it feel really good to use. I'd rather worry about when and how.
And maybe just to come also back to the point about sort of having a file to start with, because I think some of this is also like, well, can I download Material Design's Figma library and use that to start my project? And the kind of approach that we've tried, and it's definitely not proven yet, but because we're an agency and we service multiple clients, and it's often startups, so projects starting from scratch, I think this would be something for freelancers and people in an agency environment to try. We've played with building our own base, so almost like a bootstrap approach. So not trying to be a full design system, not trying to have every single widget that Material Design has, but a simple base where your button, because you've agreed with your team on how should we build buttons with variants, how should we build fields with variants, and to rebuild all of those from scratch is a lot of hours. So there is a little bit of a saving you can achieve. But again, I think the personal methodology that you use, you need to be in control of that base file and your team. And if you just download material design, well, the personal opinions of the designers at Google, as good as they are, have also sort of stipulated how that file should be used, and it might not be your way. And so there might not be as much saving as you think by just downloading something and trying to build on top of that. You could actually be faster with your own set of base tools. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I generally don't disagree. I think there are good things we can learn from all of these things. But yeah, you are adopting a very, very opinionated position when you work off a framework that you haven't developed, and it's often solving a problem that doesn't necessarily have the same context as yours. I think, like, we saw this a lot with Bootstrap back in the day, where Bootstrap was just wholesale adopted by so many people. And sure, it served its purpose as a really, really good way to get something done really quickly. And I think that's something like material design also serves that purpose. Not everyone has a budget for an entire design and front-end team to build a design system for them, right? Sometimes you're working on your own, and you need to get these things out really, really quickly. And I think those frameworks work for that use case very, very well. So I would never say don't use them. I think it's contextual as well. There are a whole lot of factors that work into them. And yeah, as other people have said, material is really, really well constructed. There is so much work that has gone into that, as opposed to something like, Bootstrap in the past, or even Foundation and those kinds of things, which work very well as code, but don't necessarily have all the UI and UX elements figured out. So yeah, I'm on the fence, I guess.
Justin, you do a lot also with sort of front-end development in your role, and I can just remember when we started using Bootstrap those many years ago, that in the end we did so many overwrites that we were asking ourselves, why are we using Bootstrap?
I always used to joke, you need a CSS specificity of like 20,000 to change the color of a button.
And then I think they released Bootstrap Lite, and then version 3 was no Bootstrap, because you just didn't. The developers started saying, like, based on your beautiful design, I rather custom build this from the ground up. And that's what ended up happening. We dropped it, but the learning from that, I think, can be applied to design files as well, and design systems, is that they are fantastic resources, and you can still use Bootstrap to understand grid systems really well and how they respond on different responsive states. They were the first guys to really tackle that, and thank goodness for that. But it's also, again, it's a reference. It's not it's difficult to use it. But you make a good point as well. When it comes to budget, sometimes you could be. It could help a lot.
And I think definitely. Oh, sorry, Justin.
No, go ahead, Bernard.
From someone who came from a place where I went from no UI design experience with full kind of agency experience on the advertising side, and then into UI, those resources are an invaluable school of good, well thought out basics. Learning how a grid works, making sure that you think of every responsive state. It's that learning school of, they thought of it, let's make sure we add it, and then worry about all the other stuff. So from more of a design side, whenever there's a question of, what should X do, referencing material, referencing Bootstrap, or referencing a really big framework and saying, well, if they do this, let's start from here and make it better, and do it our way, is kind of really the approach that took me from designing stuff that looked nice and might look really good to considered design that really considers a bunch of things?
I think one of the things that, moving on the ideas of these frameworks, I think also we've been hampered on the front end by what we can do in UI design, and we were for a very, very long time, because we didn't have the tools in CSS to do things nicely. We only really got layout tools in CSS like 2 years ago, and I think that influenced a lot of that kind of adoption of frameworks and looking at how large companies are doing this, because it makes it easier for us to manage the front end. But now that we have the ability in the front end to pretty much do any layout we want on the screen, we're no longer hampered by columns and rows. And I think that's a fundamental shift in what's happened in the front end. But we haven't seen that translating into the designs that we're doing. So we've acquired the ability to do amazing things on the front end that we've never been able to do. And we aren't taking advantage of that from a design point of view. And I'm not sure, but I think it might be because of design systems.
Oops.
It's a half-formed thought, I absolutely admit, but I think maybe we've become quite rigid in our approaches because of, and we've designed for a long time to accommodate what we can do on the front end.
Yeah,
Now we're no longer constrained by that, and we haven't quite made that shift yet, I think.
Yeah, perhaps the developers and the designers have become too close.
Yeah.
I mean, now that we're just, chucking out the baby with the bathwater, we might as well say that, the developers should tell them, listen, guys, innovate, be free, do your thing. Don't be constrained by a beautiful grid. Just go and do it.
Break out of that grid. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm talking in a generalized way, but and most of the time, you if you're building software as a service or something like that, you don't break out of that grid. That's a disaster. But when we're looking at the things we can do, when we're designing public-facing marketing sites or things like that, and then the question comes: do those need a design system?
It's I mean, the topic is design systems, so but we don't want to badmouth them too much, because I definitely agree with
not badmouthing.
not that you're badmouthing. No, I think, but it's a very interesting point that you raise around once you get into the system and you're now iterating on your product as opposed to creating on the product. So there's still new features that the product will get, and so you want to be creative, and in that case, we try and stay away from the design system and work with, even without auto layout sometimes, just to let pixels be pixels. But that's also an interesting balance. I'm interested in the rest of the panel's sort of opinion on this, of, what makes a good product designer, because some of us have a very strong UX background where the design system is, probably more natural. Some of us are very strong UI backgrounds. So Bernard said he comes from a more advertising thing. And I know it's a topic in our team, and also I've heard from other teams as well, that trying to bring back craft has now become topical again. And what I mean by that is we've all gotten used to best practice and material design and Apple and whichever other platforms that have influenced us in this direction. You can even big marketplaces like Netflix and Airbnb, they're fantastic inspiration for very, very good product design. But you can also see that we almost stagnate a little bit at times. And I wonder, you just sparked something in me that was like, well, have design systems also played a role in that we've put ourselves in a little bit of a box? Inge, you definitely think no. So for me, For me, it's an open question, so you're welcome to disagree.
I'm not going to disagree with a strong point. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be coming out guns blazing, going, you're all wrong. Like, a part of me agrees. If you are, I always say research is the enemy of innovation, because a lot of times people go like, yeah, but they've been doing it all like this whole time, and they will carry on doing that. But there is some value in knowing how people have been doing things, because the patterns are healthy. And, if you innovate too harshly and too fast, you lose people, and you might win awards for being very creative, but 2 people thought so. And, it's going to take 10 years for the rest of the people to catch up. And it's not how you sell things. Unfortunately, this is the mean beast of, large corporations. You're trying to sell something. So you need the average Joe on the street to operate the thing that you are making. So does this kill the inner designer? Yes. Does this sell the thing? Unfortunately, yes. So it is our duty to know the user and to know what patterns they are used to. And patterns are human. We like to see that the thing is always on the left and the other thing is always on the right. And as soon as an old Windows user goes to a new Mac and they go like, oh, but I can't find the close button because it's moved. Or even me, I changed my password and tomorrow I don't know my own phone's password. So, that pattern from a design system is, if it's rigid and it's stopping you, you've done it wrong. Like, I believe if you look at, I'm just going to use a component library as an example, but if you look at a component library for a massive software as a system backend like tool where you have lines and things and queries and stats versus a game, you're going to find a whole bunch of different types of components because the patterns are different. And if you're doing it right, it won't look the same at all. So looking towards material design very much looks at a certain niche, most probably app design. And again, they know the patterns, they know the accessibility rules. So yes, everything will look the same, but it'll work. So yes, the designer inside dies, but it has a function. You have to learn from what happened previously.
Yeah, I think, Jock, to add to what you were saying, and Inga as well, I think what I luckily have on some of the projects the luxury where I might be the feature designer and working with a design system team, and we have that really healthy tension of, I want to make it do this, but best practice is this. And I think where I found a little bit of success in bringing back that craft is where my job as the feature designer sometimes feels like building Jenga blocks, but then it also feels like now is the time where I can focus on adding bits of delight, adding interaction that is not something the user is used to, while keeping the patterns that they are used to. And that's gotten me a lot of freedom in designing and saying, you know what, this is all done for me in a certain sense. Now I have 3 more hours to prototype the crap out of this thing and see how we can really make it feel nice, and put myself in the shoes of the user and say, well, if this really long table set breaks, what would I want to see, and in that case, design system is freeing in a way that now I can worry about the delightful little animations or the little illustrations where if you were building all of it yourself, you had to worry about the patterns and making sure those patterns are solid before you can even get to having the fun bits that make it fun for the user as well.
It reminds me of a conversation that came up in our team the other day, which was pick your battles. So if we all know that great brands and great products need the craft, and we all know that they need the design system. So what I was saying to my team was, why are we trying to create the most visual parallaxing about page when most users are going to land on the home page? And so shouldn't we do the wow there and let the components build out the other pages, because the budget is set, So we came up with the idea, okay, we're going to pick the battles. So we'll let the designers go wild there, and then we'll rein them in, sort of as we get towards the terms and conditions pages. We can settle down a little bit.
Yeah, and I think something that to add to the design system kind of craft is it really helps starting from a place of good quality elements. So a really good, well-designed font does wonders to what a design system might feel like. A good set of illustrations and good imagery does the same. And I think that kind of craft, there's still a lot of room for that. And choosing a set of colors and those elements, that really spending the time there has also been really fruitful in saying, you know, we are kind of constricted or by whatever tech or whatever design system we have, but you know, let's not use Roboto. Let's use something that has been well crafted and does feel nice on a page. I'm going to take a knock at Roboto because
Roboto is the new Helvetica.
Please not Roboto.
Yes, Roboto is the new Comic Sans.
It's just as well Skulk is in here. He's a big fan.
So, Bernard, I actually want to applaud your analogy. It's a good analogy. When you mentioned typefaces and font design, when do you design your own typeface for a brand, right? So that is I think a good parallel. So if you look at a brand that has their own typeface, they've kind of made it, right? So if you look at a brand that has a proper design system that works, they've kind of made it, right? It is money, time. It is not a small feat to accomplish this. You can't just chuck it together. A lot of us are using what other people have done because they've done the hours, the hundreds of hours of work. And we just play around the edges. But if you had given us the time, we would most probably do the whole thing from scratch. But the budget is the thing that pretty much stops everyone in their tracks, and it kills all the creativity and the innovation and the lovelies that make us smile.
I was say, when your agency has got the brief to design a font for the product that you're working on, then you've made it, I think, as an agency, because you know your budgets are amazing.
Yeah. I think budget is an interesting consideration. I think one of the costs of a design system is that it's very expensive upfront, and I think that makes clients very nervous. So it makes it quite hard to sell. But those upfront costs are very much offset in the long term because of the processes and systems that you can get into place. So,
how do you sell it, Justin?
How do I sell it?
How do you sell it? So what's it's a very good question.
Yeah, I think selling it is really difficult. Also, in our world, perhaps we've known about design systems, this thing, for a while, right? It's not really new to us, but often you will do a pitch or whatever it might be to a potential client, and they've been working with an agency, and this is a completely foreign concept, to them, because they just haven't worked in this way before, and that goes all the way up to massive organizations, all the way down to a startup, who perhaps not familiar with these concepts. So the first hurdle you have to overcome is like, what is this going to do for me? Because I don't know what you're talking about, basically. Oh, you mean our CI document, is often the response, and it's like, no, not your CI document. It's a little bit more than that, So the first thing you have to sell is the actual concept behind this. But even then, that's not necessarily going to get you buy-in. Ultimately, it's going to come down to how much does this cost. I found the best way to do it is to actually just show people what a design system does. Like literally, this is a design system, and we have an internal project that we've built where we've designed a Figma live in Figma. We've built it in Storybook. It sits on a URL, and we actually just literally show this is the process and this is how it works. And it's not a client project or anything like that. It's just something that we've done in order to try and demo this, because the whole concept of, oh, it lives in Figma, but it's also living in code. And if I change this, then this automatically pulls through the entire system. It's a hard concept, especially when you're talking to people who aren't involved in dev or tech in any way, and who might be perhaps a traditional type marketing department. And then, of course, a CEO who doesn't care. Just tell me what I'm getting for my money, right? So we found that like this is what it does for you, and demonstrating that goes a long way to showing the power of a design system. But it's not always going to work that way, right? So what we actually do is we just build it anyway, to be frank. Because we know, and maybe we eat a little bit of billing upfront, because we know that down the line this is going to be a savior for us as a team, which is also important. How we work as a team internally on our processes, because design systems make people happy, especially developers. And you want to keep the developers happy, right? And so sometimes we just do that, but we just do it anyway. Yeah.
So I'm going to agree with that doing it anyway thing, at least partially do stuff that resembles it and get to a point where don't try and sell it. But if you had to sell it, if it was a component on your invoice as a thing, find the negative journey works well as well, and just do a status quo audit of what is happening in their lives and go, you see this 20,000 hours you spend on trying to keep this very weird Eiffel Tower made of little sticks just stand up straight. We have Lego. We'll show you how it works.
I completely agree with that. Yeah, we actually had a client who were doing all their designs in-house and then getting us to build the front end. And I want to be diplomatic here. They had no system whatsoever, and we would receive these screens and there was just no consistency. Spacing would be off, blah 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 blah, but yet they insisted that they wanted to keep doing this in-house. And then we showed them how much it's cost them for us to make changes to actually get this systematically done, so that we actually have a front-end code base that we could work with. And they were horrified, and because they would send us a new design like once a month or whatever, and it would hardly resemble the previous one in terms of spacing, type hierarchy, all the basic stuff. Yeah, and it was very instructive for them to see, okay, this has cost you tens of thousands of rand that we could have saved you by building a system. Yeah. So
I want to take a guess that they sent you a Photoshop file.
They sent us an XD file with no components, just a layout. Yeah, it wasn't Photoshop. But yeah, I think that's a really great point, Inga. Showing what your current process is costing you versus what you might have to spend now, but can absolutely save in the long run. It's still a hard sell, though.
You made an interesting comparison earlier about a brand guidelines, and I mean, maybe the secret is there that it's not a brand guideline; it's a completely separate. It's related to a brand guideline, but it's a completely different product. But I think the important thing about brand guidelines is that they've been around for a long, long time. And clients do understand sometimes that they need these things, especially bigger clients. And that every person that they outsource their design work to, their printing, whatever it is, the brand guidelines need to be respected. And you could maybe borrow some of the rationale from that to say, like, every time you hire a developer, there is a guideline, there's a book, there's something that walks them along the way. And you know, some of our clients have, you know, 50 to 100 developers, so of course they're hiring and rehiring and whatever it is. So I think there's the concept of needing guidelines is not new. It's just that it's no longer a brand guideline, it's a digital guideline, and it's a product guideline, and it's unfamiliar to them, as you say. But I think the cost is one thing, and the pain. I think, Inge, you were talking a little bit about the negative side. So just the pain of onboarding people, and you know, we also have this thing where we need to swap designers on a project, and having a good system allows for that, versus no system. So yeah.
I just want to add that a lot of large companies like your Ubers and your Airbnbs and your, you know, all the big folk who have managed design systems love to marry the normal old brand guides with their design system. They make it one massive storybook of their lives. Everything is inside. And I think if you can sell it as a brand guide on steroids, that could also perhaps help and say, listen, previously we used to cater for print scenarios, and we used to talk about spacing of lettering and all kinds of goodies, but you know, it's not developer speak, so we need to add on to what we used to do. You still do your print stuff, so we will, you know, it's part of this thing, but it's bigger. And
yeah,
that also doesn't
point.
happen in 2 weeks. That's the other thing. Like when someone asks me how do you build or how do you sell a design system, and I usually answer per hour, because it's just part of, you know, what happens. It is, oh, you want this one thing, for me to get there I need to do all of this, and I will charge you per hour to get there.
Yeah, I think we kind of do the same. Yeah, we don't have a line item called design system. We have, you know, we have, you know, UX, and that's broken down, and UI, and that's broken down, and front end, and that's broken down. But really what we're doing there is building the design system. So it's not a give us R1 million and we'll build you a design system. You know, it's very much structured in traditional ways. Sorry, say again.
But that's kind of, if you do it that way, it seems like it's a solid block and it has an end. There's no end.
Oh, no, for sure.
Maybe you guys have also experienced this, but we had a lot in Sketch, and it, you know, I kind of feel like it's coming Figma's way as well. Figma's been very good to us so far, but is the fact that you build a design system based on the way that Sketch and Figma ask you to build components, but that can change. And so we've also, you know, we started using Figma before Variants came out. And when Variants came out, we had to completely reformat our design system. And then we wanted to spot where all the old components were. So we made the old components red, and then you just saw the design file light up with red everywhere. And then you kind of spot your update. So, I mean, unlike a brand guideline, which might need very small updates from time to time, a design system is, as you said, in a living organism that is never finished.
I don't know if everyone saw, but this week Figma has shipped now interactive components. So that probably means exactly as you say. Now where we've got variants, we probably need to go and redo those as interactive components.
Yeah, and I
Never
think
ending.
from the day-to-day kind of UI designer's perspective, keeping on top of that is kind of paramount, right? It's knowing that these things are coming, and staying in the loop of what Figma is planning, it's invaluable, especially for those file structures, right? Saying that I'm the UI designer in this project, it's my responsibility to make sure that we're making the absolute most out of Figma. And taking that responsibility on is something that I think we as kind of design nerds in the studios make sure work, but it doesn't really matter to our clients, right? Even the good components and the well-structured component pages, we love it and it's really good and it really makes our lives great. And as you say, Justin, makes us happy, but clients would probably never know, and they probably don't care, and they don't need to care, right? Because it makes our lives easier, and it makes our lives much more simple. And I've always tried to take the approach of, I would have done it anyway if it wasn't even on the list of things to do, because it makes my job easier.
Yeah, I think that's how I started my previous talk. It started with, "Ooh, nice design system," said no one ever. Because no one knows it's there.
Yeah, that's so true. And our users give even less of a damn. Yeah.
I
But I
think we
do
all
think
take
what people.
Sorry, Werner.
Sorry, Lisa. No, I do think what people do see is like, hey, good visual rhythm, right, and good layout, and this page feels great. And I think taking the time to define those things, even though your / design system file in Figma might be messy, taking the time to do those things really help, and they really add to that level of craft, Jock, that you mentioned, saying that we've defined what a main lockup feels like, and we've really considered every little bit of it. Really helps in the long run.
It sounds like if we all have consensus that if the client doesn't want to pay for it, we do it in any case, because it's for the internal experience. You want your team to work effectively. So even if it takes a little bit of extra time and extra work, you still do it, which is cool. I wanna ask Bernard if you can take us through some of those tools that you mentioned before we start winding down. Otherwise, this is going to become quite long. I don't know if how everybody else feels. It normally takes like 20 minutes to wind down as well, but I've never heard of those.
Yeah, so I think something that I had to make sure that I do as the person handing over files is that there's some mental logic to my design files. And I think that in itself is a kind of an exercise that we've done in the studio to say, what does a nice handover file look like? And what does that feel like to other designers, developers, and so on? So Super Tidy is a plugin that helps you, clean up those, all those frames and put them in a really neat space and rename them nicely. Then rename it is exactly that. It's find and rename, global renaming. And then autoflow is something that we all know as designers we need to add where which journey goes. But I've also seen, design files from places where it's just a bunch of screens, right? And it's the autoflow really helps you add those annotations to where does this button go, where does this element go, and you probably don't have to do it in everything, but it really helps to have that golden path for whoever jumps into the file and says, okay, cool, I need to either build it or continue with your design to understand what you were thinking. So those three is kind of the housekeeping at the handover stage, making sure that it's really neat and really well done in terms of those layouts, And then I don't really have to care about naming my layers as much and like naming every component, because the big picture is neat, and the big picture is understandable.
Bernard, can I ask you on that topic of autoflow? So I think the beauty of software like Figma is that you're designing, you're building a design system, maybe not publishing the design system, but at least you're crafting it there, and you're doing prototypes, and there's this extra level that's more than a prototype. So a prototype is something that I can use seeing one screen at a time. And then there's that bird's eye view of the entire user journey. And I've seen the Autoflow plugin. We use Overflow, which is external software where you then, you sync your screens from Figma to Overflow just to build those out, and we do commenting there. But Figma has the commenting. And I know Figma has this versioning, or at least branching, I should say. So I'm interested to know how you approach the bird's eye level, because what we found with the advantage with something like Overflow was that we draw a line in the sand. Because this Figma file is this amazing collaboration tool, but things can break, right? Working on your navigation component, you can break every screen and so branching hopefully deals a lot with that. I haven't personally used it yet, but interested in your sort of methodology there, and how you draw a line in the sand that you can present to the developers a user journey that's got all the annotations of where each button goes, but isn't something that's getting affected by a live file.
I think we're also struggling with that final source of truth, that the prototype is really good for stakeholders and saying this is what it would feel like. Scan the QR code, play with the prototype. This is what it feels like. But that final dev software team, this is the source of truth. We're trying to figure that out as well. We've played with Autoflow in the Figma file. We've also played with Overflow and like the external elements. We're finding some really nice success now in FigJam, where we pull in Figma files. Not all those components link anymore, so they're broken, and it's kind of fine that they're broken. And what we found there is now we can bring in a copywriter. You can fill it, you can actually type in the screens, so his copy lives there. Those links that FigJam allow you to use is there as well. So I sometimes start with Autoflow and then go to FigJam and then go back to Figma, and say, here's the source of truth. So yeah, I think that struggle is also something that we try to figure out, because as soon as you change something in the design system, when is it V2 nav, right? Like the QA team is still doing V1 nav, and V2 nav is already in the designs, right? So yeah, sometimes breaking those components and putting them in a space where it is different. And I've watched a talk recently where they were saying maybe it is good to go back to Zeppelin and put everything in Zeppelin, and we say this is yours. Go build this, and we'll update it later. But
we do that. So, by the way, yeah, we use Zeppelin still because we need a line in the sand that we want to. That it's sort of, that's the commit, right? You're committing a design, and that's the point where it's becoming code, and you can't keep messing around with it. And if they're using a Figma live file to inspect elements and things are changing, that's where you can have problems. Yeah.
I found the closer we are with the dev team, the less we almost need to draw that line, right? So the closer we are to the waterfall approach, then there's the line, and here, well, that we don't have to kind of talk about it. But the closer we are to when we have the luxury of being close to the design team or the dev team as well, it's saying that, cool, I'm changing this, just ignore it for now, but it'll come later down the line. And then like nice things happen in Figma where the devs have said, oh, I see your V2 thing of this. You thought it was a lot of effort. It really isn't. We can do it now if you want. So that interaction is also something that's really nice. Doesn't happen always. It's mostly no, that's too difficult. But sometimes that happens where having the developers in the file with us. And I've also seen when developers get really excited by Figma as well, giving them edit access and saying, go have a look, go add your annotations to other developers, that's also helped a lot in terms of that communication, trying to communicate what is the final design.
Yeah, that's a great point. The developers being able to work in Figma as well is fantastic in terms of documenting, commenting, etc. It also makes them feel like they own the design. That it's not just it's not just the design, the UI designers this belongs to. It really does encourage that this belongs to everyone. I think that makes a big difference. For us, slightly different. We actually regard our front end as the source of truth, not whatever we have in Figma. Because there we are in the browser, and we can build interactivity in something like Storybook, where you literally are clicking through pages and seeing what you're going to do. We market Storybook with data. We hook into the Figma API within Storybook, because the Figma API gives you a JSON file with all your component names and everything. So we can have that clear one-on-one relationship. If we update a component in Figma, it's automatically being pulled to our Storybook data JSON file via the API. So we can have a really nice synergy there between what lives in Figma and then what lives in the front end. This is not without its problems, though, that I haven't solved. If you go and make a drastic change in Figma, and now your source of truth is your front end, well, a developer needs to go and do that work now before you can say this is final. So swings and roundabouts, but I do like the interactivity that a tool like Storybook gives us without having to go into which is sometimes quite an artificial process, clicking through screens. It's not always giving you the full picture. Having said that, we also use Autoflow within Figma itself to create those types of things. And Bernard, I'm really great that you've mentioned FigJam, because that's not something I've really looked into yet. We're still using Miro for all that kind of stuff. But I saw that.
Yeah, it's like you're using Sketch.
Yeah, I was about to say, like,
Photoshop.
There's a reason why we're all Figmaholics, is because you can get your copywriter to use it. You can get your developer to go and inspect what's happening.
Sure.
Whereas with Sketch, you need to buy everyone a Mac.
That's true. And also 3 or 4 other software packages for what Figma gives you. Yeah.
So I mean, now you've got Figma and you've got FigJam, so I can get all of my BAs and all of those people who are not really designery or even developy. I can get them into FigJam, and we can just chuck ideas around and brainstorm and whiteboard and do all of the stuff that happens on a live design. I mean, sure, yes, the components break, like Bernard said. Bernard, that's your name now.
I'm sorry.
Bernard, it's my bad. I mean, it's sorry, but yes, like you mentioned, your components and stuff break as soon as you go to FigJam. But there's no need to have 50 different software solutions to problems anymore. It's not perfect. There's a whole bunch of things that I won't mention now that's still wrong with it, but yeah. I can also mention that.
Sorry.
No, you go.
Sorry, Ingo. Something I can highly recommend that's really changed my workflow as well as working with developers was a first tutorial session with them. And it sounds a little condescending sometimes, but it's teach me how you work and let me teach you how I work, and let's see where that meets. Because Justin, that's how I completely learned how Storybook works. And we spoke about the APIs and how it pulls in and how excited the developers were about it. And I completely understood where they came from, and they could see where I came from with all of my components and how I structure it. So that first session where you meet up like people, like the software nerds we are, right? Like, just this is how you do it, this is how I do it, let's work together and figure it out, is something that's really helped me. It's opened the way that I approach handing over to a dev team completely.
Anya is not here to represent herself, but she always says, make a developer your best friend. If you're a designer and you don't have best friends developers, you have no business designing.
Inge, you said earlier maybe the designers and the developers are too close together, but I think they're so far removed still.
No, it was a joke because Justin said something. I didn't mean it. I love being this close to my developers.
I think if you break down the barriers, a designer is not just gonna pick up and start coding. That's not what we're aiming to do. It's understanding the craft of the other person next to you a little bit better, and that makes for great teamwork. Just breaking down those barriers, it can serve you so well.
It does.
I think that people still hand over like waterfall. We're very fortunate because we work in integrated agile teams, and so our designers and developers are together every day, including the DevOps engineers.
Yeah.
And the client is the link, or the last one that we've kind of brought in, where if they understand that process and they work with us almost on a daily basis, there's no sign off that needs to happen. When we decide as a team there's a change, everybody knows about it. So moving is so amazing, and it's so amazing how fast you can move if you've got the right people in the room every day.
It does.
We still have to split our designers sometimes across 2 projects, which isn't ideal, but working towards the point where it's a dedicated designer with the developers on the team, and we can see what it's doing for what we're building. It's amazing.
Yeah, we work exactly the same way on each project. Designers, front-end developers, QA, they all form a team together. They work on everything together. There's no separation of design and development in that sense.
Yeah, the last role that we've brought into the team is our automation testers, which is just that little cherry on top.
No, we have the same,
Yeah, and it just moves and it flows and it's fast and it's efficient. But I almost feel like when I listen to other people, it's a luxury. We're lucky to be able to do it that way. Not everybody gets to. You sit in the department.
I agree with that. Something else clients don't want to pay for is QA.
No, and I saw a comment earlier about research, that there's just certain things that they should almost not even know that's happening. You just tell them this is how much it's costing. They don't need to know the detail about it.
Yeah.
Because if you say people, we have to pay people to test your work, they will. I mean, why doesn't
we're getting into a whole other thing here?
I know, this is another talk.
But no, you're absolutely right.
No.
You know, that kind of a tight-knit team where you just go, let us do it. We know what to do. We know the people we need. Absolutely conflicts with an hourly billing model. And, you know, we're a service business, and that's our billing model. And yeah, there's a massive tension there. So I think, I mean, I've been saying this for ages, that we shouldn't be billing by the hour. But anyway, another discussion.
Something that I think that I struggle with as the UI designer on that kind of team is, when am I the artist, creative, kind of play UI designer, and when am I the, I know you're going to hate me for giving you this code, I'm not going to even go there designer that says, you know, this is, I know this is difficult, and be the, when am I the dev designer and when am I the design designer, right? It's something that it's something that on a daily basis I try and say, when am I in which box? And you have to have those two boxes, because if you lean to one or the other, that relationship's not going to work. If you're the guy who just goes and this is a billion boxes, build it, it's not going to work. But and the other side is, you're not going to go and explore if you let what you think code is limit you. So yeah, that internal struggle is something that to this day is something that I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Something that everyone has been touching on is okay, obviously, you know, whenever you're designing anything, you start with the user, because that's where it's ending up, and all the patterns and stuff that we've mentioned up until this point is very important. But we've been giving a whole lot of street cred to the developers, which is due. I have no qualms with developers. I make them my best friends, always have and always will. But something that I feel that, and I don't know if it's something that your designers in your agencies do often, and it's maybe the luxury of working in a larger business, is the interaction with solution architects and data scientists and business analysts, and just understanding all of the aspects of the thing that you are building. That context is the same level of awesome as understanding the guy who is writing the code. And yes, I mean, in UX, you learn, you have to, you know, speak to all of your stakeholders, and everyone, you know, can parrot that line. But how many people actually understands, or designers, how many designers actually understands the business part of it, or the architecture behind how things plug into the thing that you are building? I have my eyes opened daily by people explaining to me, oh, you think it's as easy as just doing this, this, and this, but these are the 5 API calls that happen. These are the 7 systems that they plug into. This is the database calls that you have to make just to move there. Do we really want to do it this way? And then I was like, oh, but the CX journey was so groovy for the user. Like, it was so easy. Yes, but it's going to take 7 minutes to load that page.
Yeah, this is such a good point. Such a good point. Yeah, if you're designing, I always use, like, because we do a lot of financial services stuff, and everyone loves their graphs, right? And then you have to say, like, where's this data coming from? You want us to map all your products you have in this over a year, and then allow you to filter them down to a day. Do you know how long that's going to take to get that data? You know, so you really have to be aware of that. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I mean, there's something we haven't actually touched on, is like designing with data, and not data in the sense of data about your users, but the actual data that is coming into your system and where it's coming from. If you have an ancient data warehouse somewhere that's running on bricks and COBOL or something, forget about putting that in a modern front end. You know, there's no chance. Yeah, you'll be waiting half an hour to get the data back. Yeah. So yeah, such a crucial thing. Yeah, you're just like your developers are your friends, your solution architects, your DevOps people, your database administrators. They are also your best friend. Yeah, I mean, we design anything that is heavy on data. The first person we consult is like the person who's in charge of getting that data into the system. Like, can we do this? And they'll go like, I need to look into this or whatever. Or they'll be like, are you insane? You know, and then you go and work on that, because wasted UI and UX work is a big bugbear of mine. We don't want to be doing that. Yeah.
You sort of, you know, topical is the keyword is design process here, because you know, we get it a lot where beautiful position to be in with this crypto company that we work with, they want user experience to lead everything. And what ends up happening is a lot of UX and UI wastage, because you're designing without knowing technical parameters. So what we're trying to bring into our design process is checkpoints with the business analyst, checkpoints with the, and I often ask them to, we talk about epics. So we'll say a feature is an epic, and we'll say, we're only going to start that epic once you've had a back-end developer research how he's going to pull the data in. And then at that point, we will start the user experience. So I think it's exactly, I'm saying very much what you're saying. And for me, it's all about building that into process and remembering to have those touch points and sometimes insisting on them before you even start. And then you can design, and then you can build systems from that design. So yeah, it's very valid.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And it kind of goes through your whole process as well, from UX, UI, and then crucially into front end as well, because you don't want to be building components on the front end that are going to have trouble getting data back or hooking up to APIs and so on. So even when you get to that point, front end developers very much also used to work in isolation. And they would go, oh, like, here's your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Off you go. Plug it into your API, blah. We can't do that anymore if we're working in a systematic way. Yeah, same. If we're working in a systematic way, because I can't give a back-end developer a front-end component that's useless to him or her or them. Yeah. So we really also, it's the whole process. Yeah. I'm making I'm making myself nervous thinking that this is what we do.
What is it?
It's like anxiety inducing.
We started with design processes and design system processes, and it pretty much is, yeah, it's a full spectrum process, and you need to be, as a designer, you need to be plugged into all problems because we're solutionists. You need to understand every single problem from every single angle to provide the easiest journey for the user. So saying user-centric, I mean, a lot of people, you mentioned it, they start focusing on creating the space for this one thing. I think, Jacques, you mentioned it. And it's you have to consider every single aspect of your business and of your restrictions technologically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Insert legacy issue. Yeah, it's also something I've said before.
Yeah.
Cool. Shall we? I mean, every time we have a talk, there is just like ideas for topics flowing out. Designing for data is now, or designing with data is definitely something. I also think, Bernard, there's a definite like blog piece, yeah, that you could do in terms of just a light suggestion. But in terms of one of our topics were like, how do you organize a design system? I think we're not going to go through all of that like on a panel discussion, but I think that would just be so valuable for people. I've taken notes of all the tools and stuff that you've said and we mentioned, which I'll post. But just from a practicality angle, helping people organize that information in a manner that works for developers, I think it could be so valuable.
Yeah, happy to help. The last one that I popped in now is the Google Sheets Figma plugin. Is something that has helped me loads in saying it's simple, but it helped me get that conversation going about where's this data, right? Like, what is going to be on this list and how many data points are going to be on this list? Because I need to make a Figma plugin for like work for it. And that's my reason, but it goes wider than that. So think of it first, give me even a simple card. Tell me what the copy might look like. Tell me what the header might feel like and how many buttons there might be, and have the people handing over requirements also take a little bit of time to think about it and say, maybe I don't know, and we can identify that you don't know, but here's the character limit I'm thinking of. This is what it might look like in Google Sheets, and this is what it might look like when it pulls through. Is really powerful.
Cool. Okay, then we'll wrap it. Thank you so much, Jock, Inge, Justin, Bernard. Really appreciate it. I know everybody. I don't know how many people were actually on the talk. Like, I can't see on my side. I don't know why, but I'm sure everyone really appreciated it. So thank you again. We'll post the talk, Justin, on the channel. I'm sure you'll give it or you'll post it. Yeah, and then enjoy what's left of today. Have a wonderful day, and we will chat again soon.
Thank you very much, Liesl.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Thanks,
everyone.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.